A melhor coisa que você pode fazer
é pensar em como resolver os grandes problemas da humanidade com tecnologia.
to create a better future.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm going to try and blow your mind a little bit to take you 30 years into the future, to give you the context of where data and intelligence sits in the world of the economies of the future, and how this is going to change the way we think about everything. So when we talk about the world of the future, one of the key things is that in 30 years from now, in the world of 2050, the economies of the world is going to be very different. The economies of the world are going to be based on artificial intelligence, data, technology. This is how we'll differentiate. So when we think about these smart economies of the future, what makes an economy successful? Well, it's not necessarily in the past, like in Brazil and Australia, where I am from, the ability to pull natural resources out of the ground and convert them into product is not necessarily going to be the key element of differentiation. But the intelligence behind your economy, how you use data, how you become more resource efficient, this is how you will separate yourself from other economies, how efficient you are as an economy. So the way we measure economies today, we use things like GDP and employment levels and inflation. We're talking a lot about that now. But in this world of the future, economies are competing based on how they're using data and how they're using technology to become more efficient, because now the economy is highly automated. These are some pretty significant philosophical changes. China becomes the world's #1 economy early in the next decade, probably around 2032. This could change depending on certain circumstances. For America, this is going to be a huge philosophical shock and challenge. For the last 50 years, America has been talking about the fact they are the greatest economy in the world, that they have the best system of democracy. China is going to say that the US has failed, that US's version of capitalism, the US version of democracy, and the US economy is no longer the model that it was. That's a logical thing for China to say. How will the US respond to this? Will they try to stop China's economy using their military? Well, they may not be able to stop it economically using the US dollar, because China's role in this future world economy is going to be very critical. When we look at supply chain, the world depends today on the Chinese economy and Chinese production. China is, in terms of artificial intelligence and technology integrated into the economy, is already well ahead of the United States in some very basic areas. Primarily in terms of automation of factories and thinking about AI development in the economy. There are more electric vehicles deployed in China than any other country in the world. They teach artificial intelligence at grade school to their children. The United States, you cannot specialize in artificial intelligence in education until you get to college. And then you must pay huge amounts of money to go into the American education system. In China, its access to this education is free. For every one PhD STEM graduate, this is science, technology, engineering, math, for every one STEM PhD graduate the US produces, China now produces 5. So China is a much smarter economy moving forward in this future play. As part of this, they've already started to digitize money. The central bank digital currency that they have launched in China, they started experimenting with 8 years ago in 2014. The US today is arguing about whether they should conduct experiments or trials on a central bank digital currency. Why is China so far ahead of the US in digital money? Because the US realizes that shifting to a central bank digital currency will destroy the strength of the US dollar that they currently have. And this is a quandary for them. The US dollar is today the world's reserve currency. If they start to experiment with CBDC, this changes the rules of the way we think about the economy. China doesn't have this risk. And so already we see $83 billion of this currency in dozens of cities, 5 million merchants using a digital wallet and digital currency. But when you combine China's investment in infrastructure and Belt and Road, this gives you a very different picture. This is the Belt and Road initiative that China is building for the next generations of supply chain and for production. This is to attract businesses and investment into China, but also investment going outside of China to support China's supply chain and economy. They've invested heavily in ports and airports and roads in Africa, in Nigeria, Lagos, Kenya, Nairobi, places like this. You can see they've spent over $8 trillion today already on the Belt and Road. The US has just passed an infrastructure bill where maybe $2 trillion will be spent on US infrastructure. So even when it comes to the future of supply chain, China is outspending the US significantly. When you combine the central bank digital currency with the Belt and Road, China can now enforce you must use the CBDC to trade with China on this automated supply chain using the smart contracts. Because in highly autonomous societies that run based on artificial intelligence and these smart contracts, you can't use US dollar because it's not programmable. The economies of the future must be programmed. They must be smart. The US dollar is a dumb dollar. It has no data equivalence except for a balance in an account. You can't program it in the way you can with CBDCs. To prevent fraud, to enable automation, to enable machines, to understand currency and transactions, it needs to be programmable. And these smart contracts underlie this future smart supply chain Belt and Road. So this is China's plan to remove the dominancy of the US dollar. Now, China has been very clever about their language on this. They say, well, no, this is not the intent of the CBDC, but it is technically possible. So what they're saying is, this is what it has been designed for, but they don't want to come out and say it directly. So this is part of their intent. So by the mid-2030s, we expect to see CBDCs competing with old world money side by side. But remember, autonomous societies of the 21st century, highly automated societies, must have smart contracts, therefore must have smart money, which is programmable. So this means the death of the fiat currency as we think of it today, regardless of whether it's China's CBDC or stable coins or crypto or other forms of electronic money, because it must be programmable. Now, underlying these changes is also the fact that we are going to go through dramatic changes in terms of policy and the way economies function. Energy is going to change massively. Already today, solar and wind power are cheaper than any fossil fuel source for generation of electricity. But we also have this technology called fusion, nuclear fusion technology emerging. We combine this, and by the 2050s, energy essentially will be free, broadly available. This is very important to powering the development of 21st century economies, because even the computing requirements for things like D-Wallet and the metaverse and CBDCs require us to use a lot more energy to support the computing power. So we have to have an energy revolution to have 21st century economies that are highly automated. So free energy becomes critical. Now this changes the way we think about energy systems. So we need now distributed energy systems, not like the way we think of energy generation today, where you have a power plant and you have the network and you deliver the electricity. Now we have to have electricity distributed. We have to have energy storage for renewables because the sun doesn't work at night, you know. There's that old joke about the Irish astronaut, you know. He's going to go to the sun to do, and they said, but how can you go to the sun? It's going to be very hot. He said, it's okay, we're going at night, you know. But in Australia, we have seen, this is a battery farm, now 330 gigawatt battery farm that has been deployed by Tesla and has been very successful. But we are going to have battery storage and a generation like solar panels distributed throughout our communities to change the way we think about energy systems. So some systems in the 21st century become decentralized, but other systems built around data need to become both more centralized and in some ways also decentralized. If you've been following the crypto boom over the last few years and the recent collapse, you hear a lot of talk about decentralization. The whole purpose of blockchain and Bitcoin was decentralization. And this is very important for distributed systems like energy systems. But when we talk about healthcare, this data role becomes very critical. So the D-Wallet that we're talking about, this infrastructure, your ability to own your own data, but also share critical data with other parties becomes important. So in the healthcare industry, our ability to imagine new solutions to diseases requires lots of data. Simulation of the genome and effects of new compounds on the genome requires very big, supermassive data sets. This is where AI will thrive. So in a system like America, where you have lots of these different healthcare providers and they have all of this data within their organization, or in the banking system where you have data that is not shared, these systems are going to be very inefficient in the 21st century based on artificial intelligence. You need data sharing of critical data like DNA. But you have two ways we can look at DNA. Aggregate data, which just shows us lots of data, or personal data, where we look at your own DNA and now start to analyze possibilities. Like if I give my DNA to an insurer, they have two choices. They can now say you don't qualify for insurance because I see in your genome you have a risk of these diseases. Or your insurance policy price will go up. Or they can say, here is gene therapy, which can remove Parkinson's and Alzheimer's or cystic fibrosis or breast cancer or other diseases from your genome, like editing a software bug. These are some of the technologies we'll be using in the 21st century. We are using techniques like now 3D bioprinting, We're using 3D printers to create new organs using stem cells and cells from patients. So when you do an organ transplant, you have no rejection. We'll be seeing life extension, longevity treatments, people living longer, maybe living well beyond 100 years, even longer in the future based on these technologies. And maybe in the future we'll be using nanorobots and things. But the biggest area where healthcare will improve in the short term is better diagnostics using data. We're already seeing in fields like oncology and cancer research where when a technician needs to look at an MRI or a CAT scan or an X-ray, we are now seeing artificial intelligence improve the accuracy of diagnosis in these areas based on data and artificial intelligence. We can train these machines using machine learning or deep learning. We can watch what doctors and radiologists and other technicians, how they respond to this data, and machines can learn to do these jobs better than humans. This is important because if you're in Brazil today, 40% of diagnosis in the medical field is wrong. This is why you always ask for a second opinion, right? But with AI, we'll be able to reduce this error rate down to nothing. We'll also be able to radically improve the delivery of healthcare by automating a lot of the processes that we have today. In 1980, the cost of healthcare in Brazil was about 3% of GDP. Today, it's almost 8% of GDP. In the United States, it's 15% of GDP because the US has the most inefficient healthcare system in the world. They pay more than twice the OECD average for healthcare. You watch US television and they tell you US healthcare is the best in the world. Don't believe it. In Brazil, it's very good compared with the US, right? But the point is, in the future, healthcare will be very different from what we think today. It'll probably be a subscription service hooked into D-Wallet because you need the data to get better healthcare in the future. And instead of you going to the doctor and saying, "I feel sick, doc, what is wrong with me?" you will get a message on your smart glasses or your smartphone or whatever device you're using in the 2050s, and you'll be told that maybe your blood work has changed or based on certain biometric data, you should go to see your doctor because we need to tweak your personal diet or your drug regime to improve your long-term health. So it will be a maintenance view of healthcare rather than fixing a problem when it arrives. All based on data. Data becomes absolutely critical to the healthcare system in 2050. So the world is going to be made up of these algorithms, running companies, running governments, running transportation, running healthcare, and this supply chain and automation is done through what we call these smart contracts. So smart contracts are like the legal contracts that we have today, but they have the intelligence of being able to execute on those contracts at a code basis. Everything that we do in an economy, including the legal system, including government policy, must now be put in a computer program in AI. So this is codifying the world. These smart contracts must, as I said before, use intelligent money, programmable money to work. And so this is where, again, the data comes in. So this is what we used to think of economics in the past. This is classic supply and demand, Adam Smith from 1776. And you can see what happens is when a product increases or service increases in demand, we have to increase the supply of the product. How do we do this? In today's economy, we employ more people in the factory or in the business with this objective to try and reach this equilibrium. So this is the way we have thought about economic value for 200 years now. Demand goes up, more people work to produce more goods and services. But in the 21st century, based on automation, it doesn't work like this any longer. Because as demand goes up, you just increase processing cycles for AI and the algorithms. Yes, we'll have a few more people working to repair robots and things like this, but think about all of the truck drivers that disappear because of automation. Think about all of the technicians looking at X-rays and MRI scans that now disappear because of automation in healthcare. In any industry that you can think of, we're going to be requiring less humans in these highly autonomous societies. So this brings us the issue of how we're going to deal with this in the future. If we don't have something like universal basic income, the displacement of human workers from this technology will create social fracturing, riots and protests and so forth. So when you hear of these entrepreneurs like Zuckerberg, Richard Branson, they all talk about UBI or universal basic income as being inevitable because they are trying to design companies and economies that eliminate humans from the workforce right now. That is how we have today 9 of the 10 largest companies in the world are technology companies. The value of those companies is because they produce more profit per employee than the big companies that we had in the 1960s and 1970s, which were based on pulling resources out of the ground and converting them into usable material. But in the 21st century, all of that is highly automated. So we need to think differently. Because in today's economy, your value as an individual is how much work you do. And how much work you do and the type of work you do is how much money you get. But if you can't work because the economy is automated, then how do you live? Well, some people will own the assets and the data that drives the 21st century economies, and they will be very wealthy from that. I'm sure Andre and Fernando, you do very well out of DrumWave, but the rest of us working, what's going to happen? Well, maybe we have UBI. So this is a problem philosophically for how we think of the way economies work. And so this could also be the end of what we think about capitalism, because inequality is going to be a huge problem in the 21st century. Climate change is going to produce some side effects that we have to address. Food scarcity is a big problem in the 2050s. It's not just the fact that today, if we look at food production, we have to support maybe 10 billion people by 2050. But 40% of our farmland we have lost over the last 50 years because of global warming, pollution, soil erosion, and these factors. So we have less farmland today than we had in the past. And of course, in Brazil, we have a lot of contention about the farmers destroying the Amazon and to create more farmland. This is part of the effect we have today of less and less usable land, or arable land as we call it in English, for farming. So we have to develop better techniques. If you're living in France in a vineyard, in 2050, that vineyard will not be able to produce grapes anymore because the temperature rise in France means that those crops will no longer be sustainable in France. If you live in Kent in the United Kingdom, you are now going to become a wine-producing region. So you'll still be able to get your wine, but not from France anymore. This has implications for many different types of crops, changing our farming patterns. So this also is going to produce eco-refugees, people moving because food scarcity, but also because of flooding. The estimates are very large, from 300 million people to 1.6 billion. So let's maybe go somewhere in the middle. Let's say 1 billion people are displaced by climate change, either food scarcity, flooding, temperature increases, and so forth. We've seen in Pakistan right now 50 million people affected by floods there. This is going to become a regular story from many economies. 80% of the infrastructure of Bangladesh and the Maldives will be destroyed by 2050 because of sea level rise. Miami will be the #1 city in the world affected economically because of sea level. If you listen to politicians in America, they have absolutely no plans to do anything about Miami being the #1 city affected by climate change. New York already has a $35 billion infrastructure plan to increase the sea defenses to stop flooding in New York. But up to 60% of the world's economy in 2100, 80 years from now, could be spent on climate mitigation. This is how big a problem this could be. But 1 billion people displaced by climate in 2050 requires us to think very differently about economics also. This question that we hear today about immigration, who's going to pay for it? Well, they're taking our jobs. Both of those questions mean nothing in 2050 because they're not taking your jobs. Robots are taking your jobs, not immigrants. And with 1 billion people as eco-refugees, it's no longer an ethical response to say who can pay for this. The scale of the humanitarian disaster requires a global economic effort to save these people's lives. So self-sufficiency in terms of food production means we're going to be producing a lot more food in labs and in vertical farms. Vertical farms like this in cities are 10 times more efficient than farming methods we use today for the land. And we will be producing Brazilian beef, not from a cow, but in a lab, in a factory. We call these lab-grown proteins. So beef, chicken, seafood. We're already now trying to produce this in laboratories, and this will be mass production. Because apparently the cows farting, they make very big problems for climate change, But self-sufficiency for food production becomes very important because of food scarcity. And homelessness will not exist in the 2050s because the cost of us being able to produce a new home becomes very cheap. This home was 3D printed. It took 24 hours and cost about $4,000 for a 2-bedroom family home. So this means that if you think about the problems of eco-refugees, this technology will allow us to solve this problem. It's not a cost problem anymore. It is not a technology problem anymore. It is just a policy problem. That's all. So then we come to this era of post-scarcity. All of this artificial intelligence and abundance in the second half of the 21st century must change human philosophy and the way we think in a big way. This is an asteroid called Psyche 16. This month, NASA and SpaceX will launch a mission to photograph and analyze this asteroid in the asteroid belt. This one asteroid has so many precious metals. It has more gold on this one asteroid than we think is on the entire planet of the Earth. It has rare earth metals like lithium, and it has silver, and many of the, copper, iron, and so forth. The value of this one asteroid is estimated to be $10 quintillion. That's 100,000 times our current global GDP. Now, if we could capture this one asteroid and mine the materials from it, imagine the chaos that this would produce of the economic markets. The commodities market becomes worthless overnight. But today we look at this and we say, this is impossible, right? Technically impossible. But I want you to think about the world of 2050. We are already talking about going back to the moon. China and Russia, the United States are all talking about setting up moon bases in the next few years. Artemis, which is NASA's program, should launch in the next few days for their first mission to go back to the moon. Now, once we have a base on the moon, we have access to resources on the moon. We call this in situ resource utilization. Shackleton crater, which is the big crater at the south pole of the moon, has enough water to support a colony on the moon for the next thousands and thousands of years. But this water could be used to produce fuel, and this means that if we could launch missions to the asteroid belt from the moon at a fraction of the cost of what it costs us to launch missions from the Earth today. Because the big cost in space exploration is getting outside of the Earth's gravity well. Once we can set up a base on the moon and then on Mars, the cost of space exploration comes down. So maybe we'll go to Psyche 16 and bring it back to the moon, and we will mine this asteroid on the moon, and the colonies on the moon will become extremely rich because of this. We don't know how this is going to work economically. But this is just one example of how the way we think about money today cannot work in the 21st century. We have to replace our value systems based on these changes, as we do with digital assets. So when we talk about central bank digital currency, when we talk about D-wallet, when we talk about the metaverse and crypto, we're talking about digitizing what we know in nature and the world to make it work for this computing technology that's ubiquitous. So essentially what we're doing right now is trying to record all of the data we can to model the physical world to create a digital equivalent of our physical world in data and in process. Whether that's medical data, or whether that's your financial data, all of this is a way to model and replicate the human world. When we talk about digitizing the planet, we have a number of mechanisms that we're experimenting with to do this. So you have cryptocurrencies and stablecoins. We have the world of DeFi, or decentralized finance. We have NFTs, non-fungible tokens, which are a form of security. We have this concept of a digital twin, an electronic copy of all of our data, all of our characteristics, our behavior. We have digital intellectual property, so your patents now, we are starting to think about how we can digitize patents. All of this is an effort to digitize the world. And the smart contracts is how we'll run this future world. So by the 2050s, we expect about half of all the world's economic activity to be run by artificial intelligence. These digital markets, all of the data trade that we see with the D-wallet, this only works if you can automate this through smart contracts and intelligence. So the use of our data increases when the use of AI increases. So economies that are mostly run by machines in the future. This gives humans less control over this. You can change the way an AI works to some extent, but again, if you think about half of the world's wealth controlled by AI and machines, we have to think very differently about what money means in the 21st century. Big picture stuff. So one of the things that requires us to have a mechanism like D-Wallet is that different data has different value in the 21st century. So what you spend your money on, where you buy your coffee, where you buy your clothes, this is data that is not so important to you personally, but it might be very valuable to a merchant, and they may be prepared to give you discounts in return for access to that data. But some data needs to be much more secure, like your children's DNA. You don't necessarily want this data just given to everybody for discounts on your supermarket goods. That's not a fair trade. So the ability for us to classify different data to have different value is also going to be very important. This is why we need this infrastructure like D-Wallet for managing our data assets in the future. And when we talk about where we'll live in the 21st century, yes, we'll live in a physical home, but creators of the metaverse, people like Mark Zuckerberg, hope we will live more and more time in the metaverse, spending our time and money there, because we'll be able to have a bigger home there. We'll be able to have these digital supercars. And some people believe that the reason we see this talk about metaverse today is a lot of these technology creators see this future world and want us distracted from the inequality of the current system by this bright, shiny new data world that we live in the virtual space, to distract us from the real world problems like climate change and food scarcity and so forth, inequality. So maybe there's some truth to that. But, we will have a presence in the virtual world, and the virtual world will be overlaid into our physical world as well. So one of the things we need is, you might have your smart glasses. Apple is talking about releasing their smart glasses called iReality next year. So you'll be wearing these computers on your face, which will give you data in your field of view and help you understand context. You'll walk into a Tesla dealership and you'll be able to see whether you can afford to buy a Tesla just from the information presented on your head-up display. And you'll be integrating part of the metaverse in the physical world and also spending time in the purely digital world. This is the future in the 21st century. But let's not forget, one of the reasons we're going to be living differently in the 21st century is that the world is going to be reshaped by climate change. About half of humans across the planet live within 100 kilometers of the coasts. If the West Antarctic ice shelf collapses over the next 2 or 3 decades, this could raise the sea level by 1 meter or so. Cities like Sydney Harbour, New York, Calcutta, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Shanghai, this dramatically changes the land use there. Because humans don't breathe underwater very well, we're going to have to adapt. So this problem of where we're going to live and how we're going to live is going to be a dramatic problem we have to solve in the early part of the 2050s and 2060s. We see this already starting to affect the world now with extreme weather patterns. But we're going to have to spend a lot of time and attention on this. And the biggest pursuit of humanity on a global basis for the second half of this century will be climate mitigation and climate resilience. Making our infrastructure climate-proof, building these seawall defenses to protect our assets and property, moving cities from one location to another, renewable energy systems, so we redesign our energy grids, food production. All of this climate mitigation is going to be massive. The number one employer of humans in the future is going to be climate and all of the associated effort with that. Carbon capture and so forth as part of that. So one of the ways we're going to attack climate is trying to take carbon out of the atmosphere to reduce the effects of global warming. Now, we did this in the past, historically, by growing trees. And the trees would suck the carbon out of the atmosphere and act as carbon sinks. But we have to accelerate this. Planting 1 billion trees or even 10 billion trees may not be enough to lower the carbon in the atmosphere. So we are going to have to find ways to extract that. But this also presents opportunities because that carbon can be used to produce new types of batteries, new materials like carbon nanotubes and so forth. These carbon nanotubes could allow us to produce things in the latter half of the 21st century like a space elevator, a cable that goes up into orbit where you can go on an elevator into orbit. It would take a few days of travel. But these are some of the technologies we'll be working on with these carbon-based technologies. Again, big effort for recycling. We will have companies that will be mining landfill to get precious materials out of landfill. It's a very different way of thinking about the economy and the future of mankind. And this is going to require different types of cooperation, requiring data sharing. If you want to stop money laundering, you have to share banking transaction data between countries and between geographies. Right now, this is largely unthinkable for central banks. Whether it's here in Brazil or in the United States, the concept that they would share American transactional data with Russia, this is ridiculous. But for us to tackle these problems of the 21st century, we're going to have to share a lot of this data. So governments are going to need their own D-wallet, right? Banks are going to need their own D-wallet because we have to think about these new ways of cooperating. You can't fix the problem of climate with a national climate policy. It's no longer going to be enough. 1 billion eco-refugees, you can't fix this with a local policy. It must be globally coordinated. So there's been some very interesting proposals for this. Kim Stanley Robinson, who's probably the greatest science fiction writer of our generation when it comes to climate and its impact, proposes a ministry of the future, a global body set up to administer climate defense and geoengineering to improve our response to climate change. But I'm not talking about a global government. The United Nations is not going to run the world with a global government. But we need global cooperation to tackle climate. Hopefully, this will bring humanity together. Over the next 20 years, we're going to have to go through some pain before this happens. Resource wars, potentially. Building these walls to stop immigrants coming in and things like this. This may be the short-term response to these problems, but very soon these problems become so big that we need, as a species, to attack this and tackle this. And that's really a big philosophical change for humans. At the heart of this is that data and intelligence will be automated and built into the world around us, just like electricity is today, or our services like the mobile phone today. We just take for granted that data access is available. But governments will have to be highly automated to be competitive in the future. So this means governments become what we call a DAO, a distributed autonomous organization. This was first proposed a few years ago by some of the crypto guys, and the first AI-based companies were formed using smart contracts. Now, it didn't necessarily work very well in the early stages. The first DAO was hacked and lost about $50 million, but the point is we need this core autonomous infrastructure for economies of the 21st century. So government becomes very small in the future based on automation. And we won't be electing officials like we have the election coming up here in Brazil shortly and the November election in the United States. We won't be electing officials to create laws and to supervise the government in the way we do today, because government will be AI. And the lawmakers, all they will do is build consensus from citizens to create new AIs that manage the government. It won't be representative government in the way we think of it today. So big changes philosophically there. These are the 4 scenarios that we modeled in our recent book called The Rise of Techno-Socialism. This is when we look at chaotic future versus a planned or ordered future, and economies built for the collective needs of humanity versus those that focus on more individualistic needs. So the United States and Brazil are more focused on individualistic needs today. But if you look at the Nordic regions like Sweden and Finland, they're more collective. We call them democratic socialist countries. But we have a lot of argument about whether climate change is going to affect the the planet and so forth. The more we argue about whether climate change is real, the more likely it is that when it happens, it's going to create a chaotic future. If we don't plan for these responses, if we don't start investing in these climate mitigation responses, these are 2 possible futures. The same for artificial intelligence. If we don't figure out how human society is going to transition from today's systems to AI, we could also end up with crazy, chaotic futures. We could ban technology because all of the humans are losing their jobs. And we need humans to keep working. So let's ban AI, right? Or we could say, well, we get AI built into the world around us to create a better future for humans. Healthcare costs go down. Education improves and the cost comes down. Transportation becomes free. Energy becomes free. All of these changes because of investing technology in the economy. But there are some that will say this use of artificial intelligence and data must be used to enrich individuals. This is the capitalist system, right? If we continue on this path, the sort of system we see in the US today, this neo-feudalist system, the rich will own all of the data, all of the AI, and the rest of us will be on basic income, right? This is how they see this future of the world mapping out. If you're in the 0.1%, this is a pretty good deal, right? Because you now get access to longevity treatments. Maybe you can live forever. Maybe you live in a space station outside of the Earth and all the poor people live on the Earth. Who knows what they're thinking with this? But the real philosophical change here is that AI, data, this changes in resource allocation allows us to, as a species, create the optimal future for all of humanity if we choose to. Not just the wealthiest people. And this is why we think that a form of techno-socialism that's very cost-effective, government becomes very low cost, is the best outcome for humanity in the future. But it's not like classic socialism. The citizens own the economy. The economy, first and foremost, is focused on the needs of the citizens. Then we can worry about corporations and markets and those other things. This is at the heart of the potential of artificial intelligence in terms of changing our systems. So this is really the data question and the AI question moving forward. What are we going to do with this data and crypto and CBDCs and AI? Are we going to use these technologies to eliminate poverty and create a better world for everybody? Or are we going to accentuate inequality? This is the philosophical decision we have to make. And data is at the heart of this. And data is going to change the way we manage humanity through this process. So your life is paralleled in the digital world with data, and how we use that data to make your life better is a key policy decision that governments must tackle over the next 20 years. And we can't leave this to free markets anymore, because the need to have a human purpose to this data and this technology of these future economies is critical. So at the heart of this is going to be your personal data and what you do with that and how you monetize that. So today it seems unusual to think of a savings account that has your data. But this is the only way, really. We were discussing this yesterday. How do you think about this in terms of a value store? Well, we will come to understand that our data, our personal data as a value store, is just as important as the physical assets that we have or the monetary assets we have in this future. Because our ability to leverage off data in the smart world of the 21st century will be boundless. And in that way, our data has many more probabilities or possibilities for us than our monetary assets in terms of leveraging off those. This is why infrastructure like D-Wallet is really critical for the 21st century moving forward. So I'll leave you with this one thought. All of these changes happening means philosophically we have to decide as a human race where we go. So I'll use this analogy. Elon Musk is planning on sending 1 million people to Mars to set up a city or a colony on Mars. Now imagine you're one of the first Martian colonists. You're heading off on SpaceX's Starship, you go to Mars. What sort of economy would you create on Mars? Would you create a Martian dollar and everyone has to buy their air and their food and their water using Martian dollars? Well, that's an inefficient system on the Martian economy because everybody has to be focused on creating self-sustainability as quickly as possible for the colony to survive. If something happens on Earth and those starships that are bringing the food and resources stop coming, the Martian economy or the Martian colony has to be self-sufficient as quickly as possible. So this means money is not important on Mars. Survival is more important. And this could produce an economic viewpoint or a system of sustainable prosperity, where the entire Martian colony is geared towards producing wealth for the entire colony, the best survival, the best quality of life you can have using the resources available on Mars. Not to make them rich so they can go back to Earth and spend their money, but so if those who move to Mars are essentially, most of them are going to want to stay there and believe in this future of the human colony on Mars because it's an insurance policy against anything happening on the Earth, like an asteroid strike. But this requires a completely different philosophical thinking. The thing is, we could have this type of system here on Earth, but today we don't choose to because of capitalism. So that's the real question. Will the 21st century be the end of capitalism for humanity, produced by climate change and AI, that leads us to the optimal future for humanity, which is a prosperous future for every human? I know it sounds a little bit like Star Trek, but this is the philosophical choice that is coming to us over the next 20 to 30 years. Big decisions that we have to make based on AI and climate change, inequality, and these changes coming. So I wanted to share this with you, and thank you for your time, and thank you, Andre, for the invitation.